Hey everyone, William Grant here, and I'm 70 years young. Now, I've lived long enough to know that true respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn through your actions. I've seen a lot in my time. Wars end, economies shift, families rise from absolutely nothing. But, honestly nothing, not a single one of those life experiences could have ever prepared me for the day my own son-in-law threw a glass at me across the dinner table. You see, sometimes the deepest wounds aren't left by strangers you don't know. They're carved by the hands you once trusted the most, the ones closest to your heart. It's a tough truth, but when I learned that quiet Friday evening, it was an early winter night, and the kind of evening you just cherish. The fire crackled in my living room, filling the air with warmth. That comforting smell of roast beef was everywhere, and my daughter Emily had just finished setting the table. It was one of those rare nights where the house felt truly alive. Warm, familiar, full of laughter. My son-in-law Mark was there too. To be honest, I never really liked him much, but I loved my daughter more than anything, and for her, I always tried my best to keep the peace, to make things work. Mark was, well, a man of appearances. Expensive suits, loud watches that constantly demanded attention, and a voice that just carried too much pride, too much entitlement. He always walked like the world owed him something, like his success was purely the result of his own brilliance. What he didn't know, or chose to ignore, was that much of his success was built on my quiet help behind the scenes. He did no ID, once paid off a massive debt for him when his business was collapsing. Emily knew, though she begged me not to say anything, to keep it secret. So, I didn't. I believed silence was love's sharpest sacrifice. Now, I realize it was also its most dangerous mistake. Dinner started off peacefully enough. The plates clinked softly, a gentle rhythm, and the wine flowed freely. Mark, as usual, laughed louder than everyone else, constantly talking about his new business venture. It was something about property flipping, he said, and he was absolutely convinced he'd make millions before spring. I just nodded politely, chewing slowly, doing my best to pretend I was impressed. I'd learned long ago that challenging men like Mark rarely brought positive change. It only brought chaos, a storm you just didn't need. So, I stayed quiet, hoping for a calm evening. But then came the whiskey. He poured himself a glass, then another, and another. Emily's eyes kept darting towards me, silently pleading for me to stay calm, to not engage. And I did. Primera, o Luis. But then, Mark leaned back, his eyes glassy and unfocused, and barked. Old man, pour me another one. Something inside me just paused. I looked at him, and I said as calmly as I possibly could, "You've had enough, son. Maybe drink some water instead." There is a specific kind of silence that falls right before a storm. The kind that tastes like regret even before anything happens. The laughter around the table just died instantly. Emily froze, her eyes wide with apprehension. Mark's jaw tightened, his face twisting in disbelief. How dare someone like me, a 70-year-old retired factory worker, say no to asterisk? Him, asterisk. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the plates rattle and jump. He muttered, almost spitting the words, "You don't tell me what to do in asterisk. My asterisk house." His house. Those words sank into me like ice, because it wasn't his house. It was mine. The very roof above our heads, the one Emily and he called home, was bought and paid for with my life savings. I had signed it over to them as a wedding gift 5 years ago. It was an act of pure love, not obligation. But in that moment, I realized he never saw it as a gift. He saw it as entitlement. It just goes to show you. Give some people everything, and they'll still find a way to make you feel small for it, to make you feel like you owe them more. I tried my best to hold my ground with dignity. I told him gently, "Mark, this isn't about control, it's about care. You're drunk enough, and I won't serve you any more alcohol." My words were calm, steady, the kind of tone I used to use on factory floors, to diffuse anger before it exploded into something truly dangerous. But Mark wasn't the kind to listen to reason. Not when he was like this. He leaned forward, his face red, eyes unfocused, brimming with unbridled anger, and before I could even blink, he grabbed the glass in front of him and hurled it across the table. The sound of it shattering against the wall behind me was louder than any thunder I'd ever heard. Whiskey sprayed everywhere, staining the pristine tablecloth. Emily screamed, a sound of pure terror and shock. And for a moment, time just stood still. It's true what they say. The moment a man throws glass, he's already shattered something far more valuable than the object itself. He shatters trust, respect, and peace. I didn't move. I didn't yell back. I simply looked at him. Truly looked at him. And in that moment, I saw the truth. This wasn't a man who was just angry about whiskey. This was a man drowning in his own immense pride and self-importance. And I'd simply refused to hand him another cup to sink with. My hands were steady, my breath slow, but my heart, oh, my heart broke. Not for myself. No, it broke for my daughter, because she had chosen him. And she was seeing, perhaps for the very first time, exactly what I had tried to warn her about all along. You know, the hardest part of love, truly, is watching someone you raised, someone you poured your whole life into, defend the very person who breaks your spirit. That night, something profound shifted inside me. I didn't fight back. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood up, calmly wiped the whiskey off my sleeve, and told Emily I would be leaving after dinner. She begged me not to. She cried, saying he didn't mean it, that it was just the alcohol talking. But I knew better. I'd lived too many years to ever mistake rage for an accident, to confuse true intent with a simple mishap. I told her quietly, my voice steady, one day, he'll learn what respect truly costs, and when that day comes, I'll be here, not to gloat, not to seek revenge, but simply to watch him understand. Some lessons, you see, don't need revenge. Time itself becomes the most patient, most precise teacher. That night wasn't the end of the story. It was the quiet beginning of a reckoning, one that I knew would unfold with precision, with patience, and with its own poetic justice. Because sometimes, life doesn't need you to strike back. It just needs you to step aside and let karma do its work. A deeply personal one about family, respect, and learning that sometimes tough love is the truest kind. It's a story about a night that changed everything, and how a forgotten deed became a powerful lesson. Baus. That night, the sound of shattering glass never really left my ears. It followed me home, echoing through every quiet corner of my empty house. I could still see Mark's face, red, drunk, dripping with arrogance. And my daughter, Emily. Her tearful eyes staring down at the table, too afraid to speak. I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window, a whiskey stain on my shirt, wondering when kindness started being seen as weakness. You see, you don't lose your strength when you walk away from conflict. You lose it when you stoop to their level. Paused the next morning. The phone didn't ring, and it didn't ring the day after that either. For 2 whole weeks, silence became my only company. Emily didn't call, and I didn't force her to. Sometimes love means stepping back, letting people face the truth on their own terms. Still, I found myself glancing at the phone every morning, hoping her name would light up the screen. It never did. I tried to fill my days with routine, feeding the birds, fixing the old shed, reading the newspaper. But even simple things carried a strange emptiness now. The world outside seemed normal, while inside, I was quietly grieving the loss of something I hadn't realized could die while you were still alive. Family respect. Some heartbreaks don't roar. They whisper through empty chairs and silent phones. Then, one afternoon, I decided to drive past their house, the one I had bought for them. I didn't plan to stop, just to see if it was still standing tall, the way it always had. When I parked across the street, I saw Mark's shiny SUV in the driveway, and Emily watering the front garden. She looked thinner, worn out. But when Mark stepped outside, she froze. Even from a distance, Premedicold, say it. The tension in her shoulders. The fear in her posture. He barked something at her. She nodded quickly. Then he snatched the hose from her hand and went back inside. That image stayed burned in my mind. My daughter, the same little girl who used to hold my hand when she was scared of the dark, now flinched at her own husband's shadow. You can forgive someone for hurting you, but watching them hurt your child, that's a different kind of pain altogether. That night, I couldn't shake the thought. I made a cup of coffee and sat at my desk. In a drawer, I found a folder of old documents, house deeds, savings records, insurance policies, things I hadn't looked at in years. And right there, I saw something most people forget to remember. The title deed to their home still had my name on it. When I had gifted the house, I never legally transferred the property. It was something I meant to do later, but I just never got around to it. Back then, I thought, what's the rush? Their family. Now, that delay felt like fate itself. Sometimes, what feels like forgetfulness is just destiny waiting for its turn. I didn't plan revenge. I planned balance. There's a crucial difference. Revenge comes from hate. Balance comes from a desire for justice. I knew I couldn't just storm into their house and demand gratitude. That wasn't my way. But I could remind them, in the calmest way possible, that respect isn't optional when someone gives you the very roof over your head. The following week, I visited my old lawyer, a man named Paul Henderson. We'd known each other for decades, back from my working days at the steel plant. When I handed him the folder and told him what happened, he didn't laugh or look surprised. He simply said, "I've seen this before. Bill, people forget who held them up until the ground gives way." We spent an hour going through the papers. Paul suggested something subtle, legal, but incredibly powerful. A letter, not a lawsuit, not an eviction notice, just a quiet, formal document reminding Mark that the house, legally, wasn't his, that any disrespect toward its rightful owner could have serious consequences. He promised to draft it within a day. The pen may be silent, but it carries thunder in the right hands, especially when wielded for justice. I went home feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. A profound sense of peace. I didn't want to destroy my daughter's life. I just wanted her husband to understand that arrogance has its limits. That night, I cooked myself a small dinner, soup and bread, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled a little. Justice, I realized, wasn't about noise. It was about timing. 2 days later, Mark received the letter. I wasn't there, but Emily called that evening. Her voice was trembling. "Dad," she whispered, "what did you do?" I could hear the fear in her tone, but beneath it, something else. Something like relief. I told her gently. I just reminded him that respect should never be taken for granted. She didn't speak for a few seconds, then whispered, "He's furious." I smiled softly. "Good," I said. "Maybe he'll think before raising his voice next time. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes, a whisper from the past is louder than any scream." Pause. Days passed, and I didn't hear from them again until one rainy evening when Emily appeared at my doorstep, drenched and trembling. Her mascara was running, her hands clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her steady. I let her in without a word. She sat by the fire and just started crying. "He threw the letter at me," she finally managed to say. "He called you every name imaginable. He said you were trying to ruin his life." I handed her a towel and waited patiently for her to continue. "And then?" I asked softly. She looked up, eyes red, but with a new glimmer in them. "He packed a bag and left," she whispered. "Took the car. Said he wasn't coming back." It just goes to show, when arrogance meets accountability, it often chooses to run instead of reflect. It wasn't an easy path, but sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the clearest outcomes. You know, sometimes life throws us curveballs, and we think we've reached the end of the line. But often, that's just the universe getting ready to rewrite your story. I remember a day, not so long ago, when my daughter, Emily, came home, broken. She'd been through so much, and I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate her pain. I just handed her a cup of tea and said, "Maybe it's time you stop protecting the wrong people." She cried, truly cried. For hours, we sat there, father and daughter, both broken in our own ways, but finally, honest with each other. The next morning, she looked at me, a fragile hope in her eyes, and whispered, "Dad, can I stay here for a while?" I smiled, a real, heartfelt smile. "As long as you need, Emily. As long as it takes." Sometimes, justice doesn't burst in with a bang. It comes home quietly, wearing the soft cloak of forgiveness. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. A quiet, new beginning. But destiny, oh destiny, wasn't finished with us yet. Because just a few days later, Mark, Emily's husband, came back. And he wasn't there to apologize. He came back to take something he believed was his. What he didn't know was that the law had already turned against him. He didn't know the home he called his castle had already been reclaimed by truth itself. And that, my friends, is when things truly began to unfold. It's funny how the moment you think you've won, that's when life decides to flip the script entirely. 3 days after Emily returned, I woke up to the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel outside. The morning fog still clung to everything, and through the window, I saw a familiar silver SUV pulling up near my gate. For a split second, I wondered if I was still dreaming. But then, a car door slammed, and Mark's voice, sharp, angry, and completely unrestrained, cut through the quiet air like a blade. "William, he bellowed. "Come out here, you old man." My coffee cup, which had been so warm and comforting, trembled slightly in my hand. I set it down gently, took a deep breath, and walked towards the front door. I wasn't afraid. Fear, you see, was something I'd left behind years ago, somewhere between the wars I'd fought and the losses I'd learned to live with. This was just another storm. When a man loses his fear, he becomes the calm that storms can't drown. Mark stood in my yard, already soaked from the morning drizzle, his eyes wild with rage. His shirt was rumpled, his tie undone, and there was that faint, all too familiar smell of whiskey clinging to him again, a smell I had, unfortunately, come to associate with every single bad memory involving him. "You think you can threaten me with some stupid letter?" he barked, his voice laced with disdain. "Do you think I care about your stupid papers?" I just looked at him, calmly. "It's not a threat, Mark. It's a reminder. You don't bite the hand that built the roof over your head." He laughed then, that hollow, arrogant laugh only true bitterness can produce. "You're a washed-up old man trying to scare me. You can't even take care of yourself." I smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what a washed-up old man can do when he has got nothing left to lose. Never, ever underestimate someone who's already been through worse than your best insult." Suddenly, Emily appeared in the doorway, her face etched with panic. "Mark, please, just go home," she pleaded, her voice cracking. But Mark wasn't listening. He pointed first at her, then at me. "You're both pathetic," he sneered. "Living off my money, in my house." I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Correction," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "My house." His face froze for a second, just a flicker, before that smirk returned. "Yeah, we'll see about that." And with that, he turned, got back into his SUV, and sped off down the road, kicking up gravel. Emily started crying again, whispering apologies I truly didn't need. I told her gently, "Let him shout, let him run. Truth doesn't chase noise." The loudest people are often the most terrified of silence, because that's where truth lives. For the next few days, the air felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension. I knew Mark wasn't done. Men like him never just walk away. They plot, they twist, they find ways to make themselves the victim. Primera Kajetpol, my lawyer, again, explaining everything that had happened. Kuspatiens, and a paper trail that told the undeniable truth. The following week, I got a call from the county office. Apparently, someone had tried to illegally transfer ownership of the house. My lawyer confirmed it. Mark had forged Emily's signature and submitted fake documents. trying to make the property legally his. What he didn't know, what he completely overlooked, was that every legal form still required asterisk. My asterisk signature to karma doesn't always strike with thunder. Sometimes it just lets people dig their own graves with paperwork. I let the process unfold. I didn't confront him. I didn't even tell Emily right away. Some lessons, I believe, have to be learned through silence, not through shouting much. I simply informed Paul, and he promptly filed a fraud report with the authorities. A week later, I was called in for questioning, a routine verification, they said. I showed up with every document neatly organized. The originals signed decades ago, perfectly preserved. The officer looked through them, then looked up and nodded. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "you've got everything in order. It's pretty clear what's going on here." When I walked out of that office, I felt no joy, no triumph, just a profound sense of clarity. The kind that comes when you finally understand that justice doesn't rush. It waits, patiently, quietly, until all the noise burns itself out. Revenge burns fast, but true justice, it burns steady, illuminating the path forward. If you've been following along, you know Emily and I have been through a lot with Mark. Last time, we left off with Mark getting what he deserved, losing his job, his prestige, everything. But trust me, that was just the beginning. The universe, it seems, had a much bigger surprise in store for us. Something so shocking it still makes my head spin. So, 2 nights after Mark's world started to crumble, the phone rang. It was him. His voice was frantic, desperate, a far cry from the smug, confident man I once knew. "They're investigating me," he practically screamed. "They're saying I forged papers. Your father's doing this to me, isn't he?" Emily, bless her heart, was trembling as she handed me the phone. I took a breath, waited a beat, and then, as calmly as I could, I said, "No, Mark, you did this to yourself." There was a moment of absolute silence on the line, then a torrent of curses, and he hung up. I gently placed the phone down, turned off the lamp beside me, and whispered to myself, "That's enough. You know, the best kind of revenge? It's when you don't even have to raise your voice to win." But oh, how wrong I was about it being enough. Fate, it seems, wasn't done twisting the knife. The very next morning, Emily found out Mark's company had caught wind of his legal troubles. His boss, apparently, wasn't too thrilled about the scandal. Within a week, Mark was suspended, pending investigation. And within 2, he was fired. Hus, like that poof. Everything he thought he had. Then, he tried to come back, not for love, not for remorse, but for shelter, for a place to hide. But the door that once opened so easily to him now stayed locked. Emily stood by the window, watching his car idle outside. She didn't move. She didn't wave. She just watched him sit there, slowly realizing he had no power left, no sway over her or our lives. And then he just drove away. I walked up behind her and said quietly, "You don't have to save people who keep drowning themselves." She nodded, silent tears streaming down her face. "Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I didn't see who he really was until he lost everything." It's true, isn't it? People's true faces often appear when their masks of power finally fall off. It's a harsh lesson, but a powerful one. Days turned into weeks. The investigation continued. Mark's pride, once so towering, had completely collapsed, replaced by sheer panic. He called relatives, begged for help, even tried to blame me for ruining his life, but no one believed him anymore. The story was simple, clear as day. A man forged legal documents to steal from his own family, and the truth, as it always does, caught up. And all I did during all of this, I sat on my porch, feeding the birds, watching the sunset, and letting karma finish what had quietly begun. The sweetest victories, you see, often come from the calmest hands. You don't need to shout to make your point. Then, one evening, a letter arrived from Mark. It was handwritten, trembling, angry, but strangely, utterly defeated. "You've taken everything from me," he wrote. "Are you proud of that?" I smiled as I folded the paper. I hadn't taken anything. I'd only reclaimed what was already rightfully ours. That night, I burned the letter in the fireplace. The flames licked the edges slowly, curling the paper into ash. Emily watched silently as I said, "Sometimes fire is the only way to clean the past. Some endings aren't about destruction. They're about closure, about making space for something new." But what I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that Marcus' downfall had only just begun. And the next chapter, it would reveal something even I hadn't seen coming. A hidden truth about his past, the lies he told to win Emily's heart, and the real reason he hated me so much. Sometimes, you think you're seeking justice, or just peace, and instead, you uncover secrets you never even wanted to find. It's like peeling back a layer, and finding a whole other world beneath. That week, the house was quieter than usual. The fireplace still crackled. The old clock still ticked steadily on the wall, but the silence between each sound felt heavier, more profound. Emily was still trying to recover from everything that had happened. Her husband's deceit, the humiliation, the sheer emotional wreckage. She barely spoke, except for a quiet goodnight. I didn't force her to talk. Sometimes, silence does more healing than words ever could. It allows space for thoughts to settle, for feelings to process. But one morning, as I was sorting through some old files in my study, a plain white envelope slid through the mail slot. No name, no return address, just a single chilling sentence written in sharp black ink. "You don't know who Mark really is." The most dangerous truths, I've learned, often arrive without a sender. I turned the envelope over. Nothing. No hint of where it came from. I opened it carefully, my heart doing a strange little flutter, and found a single sheet of paper inside. On it were two items. A photograph, a younger Mark standing in front of a different house, with another woman and a child, and a small, cryptic note that read, "Check country records, 2013. Marriage license." I sat back in my chair, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. My first thought wasn't anger. It was sheer confusion. I'd known Mark for years. I thought I'd known his story, his background. But this photograph, it told me otherwise. I reached for my glasses, put them on, and studied the image again. The woman definitely wasn't Emily. And the child had Mark's eyes. Every lie, no matter how clever, casts a shadow, and eventually, the light finds it. It always does. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I'd lived long enough to know that life often hides the truth under layers of misunderstanding, under assumptions and but still, something in my gut, that old familiar intuition, told me this was serious. This wasn't just some disgruntled exit. This felt different. So, I called Paul, my lawyer, and a very old friend, and asked him to discreetly look into Mark's past, just to confirm if there was anything unusual. I tried to sound nonchalant, but I think he heard the tremor in my voice. 2 days later, Paul called back. His voice was quiet, heavy, almost a whisper. "William," he said, and I knew instantly it was bad. "I found something." Mark was married before, legally, and he never filed for divorce. He's technically a bigamist. And that child, his son, he abandoned them both 12 years ago. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, staring out the window at the yard where Emily used to play as a child, where Mark once stood smiling, pretending to be the perfect man, the perfect husband, the perfect son. It was like the world had tilted just slightly off its axis. The scariest monsters, I realized, are often the ones that call you dad. And this story, well, it was far from over. If you remember, we left off with Emily's world completely shattered by Mark's deception. But what happened next? How do you pick up the pieces when the person you trusted most turns out to be a complete stranger? Let's get right into it. When I first uncovered the truth about Mark, about his secret marriage and his child, I didn't immediately tell Emily. She was already so fragile, so broken by his initial abandonment. My daughter's pain was palpable, and I just couldn't bring myself to deliver another blow. Not yet. But I knew I couldn't ignore it. I carefully gathered every piece of evidence, the marriage record, those photographs, and even a notarized statement that Paul, our incredibly helpful lawyer, had prepared. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protection. It was the kind of fierce, unwavering protection a father feels for his daughter when the world shows its absolute sharpest, most cruel teeth. Is cracking with a desperation that was almost chilling. Emily, who's in the kitchen, froze, her hand trembling around her teacup. Her eyes darted to me, wide with fear. I knew I had to handle this. I walked slowly to the door, my heart pounding, and opened it just enough to look him directly in the eye. "Mark," I said, my voice as calm and steady as I could make it, "this isn't your house anymore." The smell of cheap whiskey wafted off him, sickly sweet. "You think you can ruin my life? You old bastard," he slurred, staggering forward. But I didn't flinch. I stood there, silent and still, like an unmovable wall. "Get off my property," I repeated, my voice quiet but firm. He laughed then, a hollow, bitter sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You'll regret this, both of you." It's an interesting thing about people who lose control. They often mistake silence for weakness. They see a calm response and assume they've won something. He turned abruptly, stormed off, and in a final act of petty rage, kicked over a flower pot near our gate, sending soil and terracotta shards scattering. As soon as the door clicked shut, Emily crumbled. She wasn't crying at first, just shaking. "Dad, I don't understand why he's doing this," she whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. "What did I ever do to deserve this kind of hate?" I held her shoulders gently, my heart aching for her. "Sweetheart," I told her, looking into her tear-filled eyes, "some people hate the wife he never divorced." She sank onto the couch, her hands flying to cover her face. The sound that came from her then wasn't crying. It was a deep, guttural sound of utter disbelief. All these years, he told me he was single, that I was his everything. My heart broke for her. I reached out and gently rubbed her back. "Primera Said softly, some men build their entire lives on lies, Emily, and they have the audacity to call that love. But love built on deceit, my friends, always collapses under the weight of truth. It's just a matter of time." Even bank transfers showing how he'd been expertly living off both women for years, manipulating their emotions and their finances. The media, as it always does, caught on like wildfire. A scathing headline appeared online. "Local businessman under investigation for fraud, bigamy, and identity theft." Mark's carefully constructed world, his empire of lies, burned to the ground overnight. His company blacklisted him. His so-called friends distanced themselves, and the life he'd so painstakingly built on manipulation and deceit came crashing down around him. Karma, it turns out, doesn't need help. It just needs time. And it always delivers. After that storm, Emily slowly but surely found peace in the smallest, most beautiful moments. She started gardening again, tending to her plants with a gentle focus. Laughter began to return to her voice, a genuine, joyful sound that had been missing for years. A sound I thought I might never hear again. She told me once, "Dad, I used to think forgiveness meant letting someone back in. But now I see, sometimes forgiveness is just letting go." I smiled, my heart full. "Exactly, sweetheart. You can forgive the storm, but that doesn't mean you walk back into the rain. True forgiveness isn't about opening a door to pain. It's about locking it with peace." But I wasn't entirely done yet. I had one last thing to do, a final, quiet act. I took that photograph, the one that had arrived anonymously in the envelope, the picture of Mark with his true family, and mailed it back to his last known address. Attached was a short, simple note. "You could have had a family. Instead, you built lies. No threats, no anger, just the truth. Because sometimes the quietest words cut the deepest, and the truth is the sharpest weapon of all." After that, I never saw him again. Not in person, not even in town, but word traveled, as it always does. He'd reportedly left the state, broke, divorced, and completely abandoned by everyone who had once believed his carefully crafted illusions. Maybe, just maybe, he finally faced himself. Or perhaps he simply ran from the mirror, unable to bear his own reflection. Either way, his story had ended exactly the way it began. With a lie. The end always finds a way to resemble the beginning, especially when the lesson is unfinished. The weeks that followed felt like walking through the aftershocks of an earthquake. Everything was quiet, still, but subtly rearranged. Emily spent most mornings on the porch, sipping tea, staring out toward the garden, where winter's chill had left the trees bare but promised new growth. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for Mark to call, wasn't pretending that things were fine. She was finally breathing without permission, living for herself. I watched her from the kitchen window, witnessing that slow, steady healing that only comes when truth has burned away illusion. There was something profoundly peaceful about it, the way light touched her face again, the way her laughter began to return in small, quiet doses. It reminded me that peace doesn't come from winning a war. It comes from surviving it with your soul intact. Sometimes, peace isn't found. After RevengeX is asterisk the revenge. One afternoon, as I was stacking old books in my study, Emily walked in, holding a letter. "Dad," she said softly, her voice a little breathless. "This came in the mail. It's from Mark." I froze. The air seemed to tighten around us. She handed it to me, her hands trembling slightly. But this time there was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet readiness, as if she knew this was the final piece, closure waiting to happen. It's about a harsh lesson, unexpected justice, and the quiet power of resilience. It all started with a letter, not just any letter, but one filled with bitterness from a man named Mark, who believed I had destroyed his life. He'd lost his business, his reputation, his freedom, and he was convinced I was behind it all. His words were rushed, messy, accusing me of teaching my daughter Emily how to hate. But as I read it, a quiet understanding settled over me. Mark still didn't get it. He thought this was hatred, punishment. He couldn't grasp that life was simply mirroring what he had built. You can't call it bad luck when it has to bill for what you've ordered. Emily, my daughter, asked if he would ever change. I told her that people like Mark don't change. They get exposed. Once the mask falls, they spend their lives chasing pieces of it. And in that moment, she found her own closure. It wasn't dramatic. It just quietly took its seat. Months passed, and life slowly eased back to normal. I spent time with old friends, talked about simple things, and never once brought up Mark. Some things, I realized, belonged in silence. I'd had my justice. I didn't need applause. Then, a headline in the local paper caught my eye. Former businessman found guilty in tax evasion and fraud case faces 5 years in federal prison. There was Mark's picture, looking hollow-eyed. He felt no joy, no satisfaction, just a quiet understanding. The world had done what it always does, balanced itself. Karma doesn't rush, it walks quietly, but it never forgets. The address. A few days later, sitting by the lake where I'd taught Emily to skip stones, I reflected on everything. The humiliation, the silence, the revelation, and finally, this quiet justice. And it heat, my revenge is just another word for correction when done with grace. True revenge doesn't shout. It whispers peace when chaos expects, screams. I realized I wasn't carrying anyone else's pain anymore, and even my own felt lighter. Mark had accused me of teaching Emily hate, but he was wrong. I'd taught her to stand tall, to face cruelty without letting it stain her heart. That was my true victory. The greatest revenge isn't payback. It's raising someone who refuses to become bitter. Winter gave way to spring, and Emily truly blossomed. She planted flowers, painted our porch, and even started teaching art classes. Her laughter filled our home, bringing color back to walls that had forgotten what joy sounded like. Watching her heal was worth every sleepless night. One afternoon, clearing the attic, I found an old wooden box with photos. There was one of Mark, from a time when we thought he was family. I almost threw it away, but something stopped me. I put it back gently. The past doesn't need to be erased. It just needs to stay where it belongs. Forgiveness isn't forgetting the wound. It's refusing to let it keep bleeding. A month later, Emily received a letter from one of Mark's former colleagues. It wasn't about business. It simply stated that Mark had asked for one final request, that Emily never visit him. She read it, folded it, and said, "That's one wish I'll grant." Her voice held no anger, just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you've already said goodbye a long time ago. The absence of anger is the loudest form of freedom. That night, by the fire, I thought about how one cruel insult had spiraled into a storm, only to end in silence. Truth and balance. I looked at the family photos on the mantle, with Emily, me, and even Mark. I didn't move it or break it. I left it there as a reminder that every betrayal once wore a smile, and every wound eventually becomes either a scar or a story. The choice is yours. Primeralia, Ned Bike. Closing my eyes. I was 70 now, old enough to know that time doesn't heal everything. It just teaches you how to carry it better. And maybe that, all the justice any of us really need. The strength to carry pain without letting it turn us cruel. Revenge fades, but wisdom stays. 3 months. 3 long, silent months. That's how much time had passed since Ethan, my son-in-law, threw that glass at me. Not a word, not a message exchanged between us, or even with my daughter, Amanda, since that awful night. But don't mistake my silence for indifference. Oh no, I was watching, always watching, from the quiet background, with the kind of patience only an old man with a lifetime of experience can muster. You see, caring doesn't always mean speaking. Sometimes it means strategizing. Sometimes it means letting consequences unfold. When the first domino, as they say, had already fallen weeks before Amanda's call. Ethan's grand whiskey business, that empire he loved to brag about, it was starting to show cracks. His arrogance, you know, it's a funny thing. It convinced him he was invincible, led him to make one risky investment after another, pushing out smaller partners, ignoring those pesky regulatory checks. He was building his empire on shaky ground, and he was too busy boasting to notice the tremors. A knowing smile. But I had friends in low places, or rather, in very informed places. My old lawyer friend, George, a man who once navigated the labyrinth of the state's commerce office, he tipped me off. He mentioned that Ethan's smooth money trail wasn't quite as clean as he liked to pretend. And that, my friends, is where my quiet work truly began. I never lifted a finger in anger, never spoke a harsh word. My only goal was to help the truth breathe, to let it see the light of day. I gathered the information, the documents, deals Ethan himself had signed without bothering to read. Deals that were clearly illegal under new local alcohol licensing rules. I didn't shout from the rooftops. I didn't confront him. Instead, I simply mailed the right documents to the right people. Anonymously, of course. Just a little nudge for justice. And I never said a word to Amanda. Not yet. She needed to find her own path to understanding, not be told by me. And then things started to happen. Quietly, slowly, but inevitably. The state opened an investigation into Ethan's business. His suppliers, who had been pushed around for so long, started pulling out. His workers, who hadn't been paid on time, began demanding what was owed to them. Ethan, poor, arrogant Ethan. He thought it was just a string of bad luck. He thought the world was conspiring against him, but it wasn't luck. It was consequence. Slow, calm, and utterly unavoidable. The seeds he'd sown were finally bearing fruit. And then, one quiet morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Amanda. 4 simple words that cut right to my heart. "Dad, can you come?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. The father in me, the one who wanted to protect his daughter from all harm, wanted to rush to her side immediately. But the man in me, the one Ethan had so carelessly humiliated, that man wanted to stay silent, to let Ethan face his ruin alone. But ultimately, my daughter's called one. I went anyway, because that's what a father does, isn't it? When I arrived, their once grand home felt diminished. The yard, usually so manicured, was unkempt, weeds snaking across the brick path. Inside, the living room felt cold, half empty, missing furniture, boxes stacked carelessly near the stairs. Amanda met me with red, swollen eyes and a voice that trembled, barely a whisper. Dad. I didn't know who else to call. My heart ached for her. What's wrong, sweetheart? I asked gently, my voice as steady as I could make it. She hesitated, then the words spilled out, a torrent of pain and fear. Ethan's losing everything. The business is under investigation. The bank froze our accounts. And he's drinking even more. I just nodded quietly, the exhaustion etched on her face, the silent apology she couldn't quite voice. I saw it all. And then Ethan stumbled out from the kitchen, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, a shell of the man he used to pretend to be. A shift to a more confrontation tone, but still calm well. If it isn't the preacher, he slurred, a bitter sneer on his face. Hello, Ethan, I replied, my voice calm, unwavering. He scoffed. You came to gloat. To see me fall. I looked him straight in the eye. No, I said softly. I came because my daughter asked me to. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Of course. The dutiful father. You always think you're so righteous, don't you? You think the world rewards good people? Look around, old man. It doesn't. Amanda turned away, tears welling up again. Ethan, please don't start. But he ignored her, his eyes fixed on me, suspicion dawning. You think I don't know what's going on? Someone leaked those documents. Someone reported those accounts. And I have a feeling, he pointed a shaky finger at me, that someone was you. I didn't flinch. I just held his gaze. Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but firm, you did that to yourself. The silence that followed was deafening. I glared at me, breathing hard, but for the first time, he had no words. Just shame. Deep, burning shame. Amanda sobbed, running upstairs, unable to bear the tension. I turned to leave, but then Ethan's voice cracked behind me, raw with defeat. You ruined me. I paused, turning back one last time. No, I said, my voice gentle but resolute. You ruined yourself the moment you thought respect was something you could buy with whiskey and power. But that night, I left him standing there, broken, furious, and finally, alone with the truth of his own actions. And sometimes, my friends, that's the most powerful thing we can do. But fate, as they say, wasn't done playing its hand just yet. A mere week after that unsettling encounter, I received an invitation. It was Amanda again, and this time her voice held a composure I hadn't heard in ages. Dad, she began, a plea woven into her words. Can you come for dinner, please? Ethan wants to talk. Something in her tone, a quiet urgency, told me this wasn't just an olive branch or some superficial apology dinner. It felt like closure, a turning point. When I arrived at their house, a strange sense of déjà vu washed over me. They had set the very same dining table, the one where that glass had once flown across the room, shattering more than just crystal. But tonight, the air was entirely different. There was no cloying smell of stale whiskey, no suffocating blanket of arrogance hanging heavy in the atmosphere. It was the soft, gentle clinking of cutlery, and a man who, to my eyes, looked like he'd aged a decade in a mere 3 months. Ethan stood as I entered, a gesture I hadn't seen from him in years. Mr. Miller, he said, his voice surprisingly quiet, his gaze avoiding mine as if he couldn't quite meet it. Thank you for coming. Amanda offered a faint, almost fragile smile. "Please, sit." I lowered myself into the familiar chair, feeling the strange, heavy weight of the past pressing down. The last time I'd been in that very seat, humiliation had filled my heart, a bitter, burning sensation. Tonight, however, something else entirely filled the room, a palpable sense of humility. Ethan took a deep, shaky breath, the kind you take when you're about to dive into cold water. "I owe you an apology." I didn't interrupt, not a single word. I just listened, truly listened, for the first time in a long time. He swallowed hard, his throat working. "I was drunk, I was stupid, and I was incredibly proud. I treated you like a burden, Mr. Miller, when all along, you were the only one who ever truly showed me what family actually means. I lost everything, because I genuinely thought I was smarter than everyone else. Turns out, I was just empty." Amanda, sitting beside him, quietly wiped a tear that had escaped her eye. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze steady on Ethan. "Ethan," I said softly, "it takes a tremendous amount of courage to say those words. But an apology isn't just about words, is it? It's about what you do next." He nodded, a weary, defeated but profoundly sincere look on his face. "I know. Believe me, I know. That's why I asked Amanda to call you. I want to make things right. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can start by showing you respect." For the very first time since I'd known him, his voice didn't carry that old, grating pride. It carried truth. Raw, unvarnished truth. Dinner proceeded in quiet tones. No yelling, no chaos, no simmering anger threatening to erupt. Just three people finally sitting together, like family again. Fragile, yes, but real. After the meal, as I stood by the door, pulling on my coat, Ethan approached me. He held out something small, a wooden box, smoothed by age and handling. "What's this?" I asked, genuinely curious. He offered a faint, almost shy smile. "A token of apology, Mr. Miller. It belonged to my father. He was a carpenter, a true craftsman, before I thought I was too good for honest work." I opened the box. Inside was a simple, hand-carved plaque, the words etched deeply into the wood. Asterisk, respect is earned, not demanded. Asterisk. I traced the letters with my fingers, feeling the texture of the wood, and said softly, "Your father was a wise man, Ethan." He nodded, his eyes distant. I wish I'd listened to him sooner. As I left that night, the air felt remarkably lighter, not because some grand revenge had been exacted, but because justice, in its quietest form, had finally found its way home. Driving back, I thought about how terribly easy it is for a man to lose himself in the quicksand of pride, how easily genuine kindness is mistaken for weakness. But in the end, truth always surfaces, not through anger, not through vengeance, but through consequence. The glass Ethan threw had once shattered across my shoulder, a painful, stinging memory. But tonight, it felt as if the very last piece of that broken glass had finally been gently set down. And that's when a profound realization settled over me. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the final, most powerful form of revenge. The kind that heals instead of hurts. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about letting them face the stark, unforgiving reflection of who they became, until they finally, truly see you for who you always were. The next few weeks after that dinner were remarkably quiet, almost unnervingly so. For the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't waking up to the bitter taste of resentment, or replaying Ethan's hateful outburst in my head like some broken record. Instead, I found myself sitting by the window each morning, watching the fog roll gently over the yard, just the way it used to when my late wife, Margaret, was alive. I'd make my tea, open the blinds, and whisper, "Well, Margaret, looks like things are finally turning." But peace, true peace, doesn't always arrive without echoes. Every action, good or bad, leaves ripples in its wake, and Ethan was still standing squarely in the middle of his own. Amanda called me one afternoon, her voice steady now. but laced with an undeniable weariness. "Dad," she began. "Ethan's been trying to rebuild, really trying. He's been meeting with small business owners, the very same ones he underpaid before. He says he wants to make amends." I smiled faintly. I genuinely smiled this time. "That's a start, Amanda. A good start. A man doesn't change overnight, but the road, any road, always begins with one honest step." She sighed softly, a sound of relief and exhaustion intertwined. "He even quit drinking. Dad said he poured out every single bottle in the house." That line hit me hard. I remembered that same house, once filled with laughter that wasn't kind, jokes that weren't funny, and the heavy, sickly, sweet smell of whiskey that always seemed to mask a deeper guilt. Now, those same walls were, perhaps, learning to breathe again. Still, I knew in my heart that the hardest part wasn't just starting over. It was learning to truly live with what you've done. Regret, after all, is a heavy teacher. It doesn't speak loudly. It just waits. It waits patiently until you're quiet enough, truly quiet enough, to finally hear its relentless, echoing truth. A week later, a letter arrived in my mail. It was handwritten, the script elegant and unfamiliar, addressed simply, *, to Mr. Robert Miller. *, it was from Ethan. I hesitated before opening it, my fingers tracing the sealed flap. A moment of pure anticipation of what this new ripple would bring. When I finally unfolded it, the words on the page were written in a slightly shaky ink, a testament to the man who penned them and to the weight of his message. This is a tale about turning that pain into purpose. It all started with a letter. A letter from my son-in-law Ethan, a man who, let's just say, had caused quite a bit of trouble in our family. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm trying to become the man Amanda deserves, and the son you never had, but always treated like your own." He mentioned finding my late wife's old book, filled with her notes on kindness. He said it made him realize how far he'd fallen, and he just ended with, "I'm sorry. Truly." For a long moment, I couldn't move. My old hands trembled as I held that letter. It wasn't just an apology. It was a raw confession, a glimpse into a man finally facing his reflection. That letter, it changed everything. It wasn't about erasing the past, but acknowledging it. The very next Sunday, I found myself visiting Amanda and Ethan again. And the moment I walked in, I noticed it, the subtle shift. Instead of the familiar scent of alcohol, there was baked bread. Instead of business trophies, family photos now adorned the shelves. And the air, it felt different. It was peace, a feeling I hadn't known in years. Ethan was in the kitchen, apron on, looking a bit awkward but unmistakably smiling. "I can't believe I'm saying this," he chuckled. "But dinner's on me tonight." I couldn't help but tease him. "No whiskey involved, I hope." He grinned back. "None. Just redemption and roast chicken." And then Amanda laughed. That sound, light, genuine, completely unguarded. I realized in that moment that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, but about transforming it. It's about turning bitterness into wisdom and pain into a new kind of purpose. When Ethan raised his glass of water for a toast, he said, "2 new beginnings, and to the man who taught me what family really means." My chest swelled with emotion. 2 lessons learned the hard way, I replied, the ones that actually stick. You see, when the storm passes, the calm isn't just silence, it's understanding. That's where real change truly lives. Weeks turned into months, and the ripples of that one dinner spread further than I could have imagined. Ethan started volunteering at a local shelter for recovering alcoholics. Amanda told me he'd spend hours there, talking to men who'd lost everything, openly sharing his own story, not hiding from it anymore. People started approaching me in town, at church, saying, "Mr. Miller, your son-in-law's been helping people. You must be proud." And I would just smile. "I am." He found his way back. But what truly moved me was something Amanda shared one evening. "Dad," she said, Ethan wants to name the community center after Mom. He said she was the kind of person he wants to honor. For a moment, I was speechless. My wife, Margaret, had never met Ethan. Yet, through the echoes of our family's struggles, her goodness, her spirit, had somehow reached him. It felt strange, almost poetic. The same man who once threw a glass at me was now spending his nights helping rebuild broken lives. The hands that once trembled with anger were now working to serve others. That's something revenge could never accomplish. There was grace, the kind that only arrives when pride finally bows its head. Sometimes, karma isn't punishment, it's redemption, a chance to start over. A few months later, Ethan invited me to the opening ceremony of the new community center. The building itself was modest, fresh paint, some benches, but above the entrance, a hand-carved sign read, "The Margaret Hope Center." As I stood there, tears welled in my eyes. The woodwork was beautiful, and I recognized the carving style instantly. "Did you make this?" I asked him, quietly. He smiled. "I did. Your old tools were still in Amanda's garage. Primera figure. It was time to build something that actually mattered." He paused, looking at me with humility and a healthy kind of pride. "I couldn't bring back what I broke," he continued, "but I can honor what I ignored." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You already have." That day, looking at the faces of all the people who'd come to the opening, men, women, children, I realized the full circle had finally closed. Ethan's arrogance had destroyed a business, but his humility had built something far greater. Purpose. And for the first time in years, he felt my Wi-Fi's presence. Quiet, approving, peaceful. Driving home that night, I didn't feel like a man who had won revenge. I felt like a man who had witnessed justice in its purest, most human form, not through ruin, but through redemption. The greatest revenge isn't seeing someone suffer. It's seeing them change. That evening, I placed Ethan's old letter inside my wife's photo frame, right next to her beautiful smile. And as I turned off the lights, I whispered, "We did it, Margaret. The storm's finally over." The house was silent again, but teased. It was a kind of silence that brings peace, not loneliness. Because sometimes, the people who break you the most are the ones who end up rebuilding you in ways you never expected. All those nights of humiliation, all those moments of hurt, they had led here. To understanding, to healing, to a kind of justice only life itself can deliver. Never rush revenge. Sometimes, time itself does the work better than anger ever could. The following winter arrived quietly. The kind of winter where the snow doesn't shout. It just falls, slow and soft, blanketing every memory it touches. By then, things had truly settled. Ethan's business was stable under honest hands. The community center was thriving, and Amanda's laughter filled every phone call I received. But peace, as I'd learned through a lifetime of trials, is never truly final.